Welcome to this month's virtual detour of Elm Bend with the Bluegrass Trust. I am Kayla Bush, descendant of Elm Bend and a historian, researcher, and professor. I am here today with
Lynn Pruitt. I am a writer and a farmer, and I own this farm where the Elm Bend community lived. And so the two of us have been working on a collaboration to explore the history and see what the connections are and how this geography informed the place then and still does today.
Take a walk with me and Lynn as we show you some of the places where my ancestors lay at rest. So currently, well today, this land is called Four Hills Farm. And of course, this is Lynn's farm, but right now, back during the 1800s, around 1865-ish and on until about 1980-ish, there were records of the Elm Bend AME Church, St. John Church, which is right down the road, and then the Elm Bend Original Colored Schoolhouse, and the Elm Bend Cemetery, which would have been located right in this area on the creek. And what's so significant to me about that is my ancestors actually were conveyed 62 acres of land in this area. So on top of this cemetery, there is another cemetery just around the corner from here. That would have been the Case family homestead. The oldest two ancestors that are named on my Case side are Ben and Ann, born in 1823 Ben and 1828 Ann. And they were enslaved by the Ford family. Their burial sites and their death dates are not listed. And when I say their burial sites, it says they're buried on the family homestead, but what we don't know is the exact place of the burial site and what part of the land are they buried on. But in this area where these stones are, there are Cases, there are Kretz, there are other families such as Johnsons. There are a lot of other community members from Elm Bend that were buried in the Elm Bend Cemetery. You know, I grew up across the street from Russell Cemetery, and in the middle of that cemetery is James P. Ford's burial plot. And to know that my whole entire life I grew up right across the street from my family's enslaver, that started bothering me. It kind of enraged me a little bit to know that he's been, after all these years, he's been memorialized in this way, and people can walk to his gravesite, can put flowers, they can look at him, but I can't do that. I can't find my ancestors, and my ancestors were quite possibly the ones that made sure that he was able to have that burial plot. It's more emotional now than it was in the beginning, because now I know for a fact that they're buried out here. So now it's more of a, oh, I found them. I try not to cry. I really do, because you know, I didn't know them personally, but it's like I have some type of personal connection to this, and I just can't let it go. It's like I have to make sure that they are memorialized in such a way that they'll never be forgotten again. Their history needs to be told, it needs to be kept on file, just like every other family in Woodford County. I should never have to worry or wonder where my family came from or where I came from, because I don't know too many of my friends that I grew up with in Woodford County that had that problem.
So often you have history, which is usually white history, and then you have black history as if they existed this way. And instead, they didn't. They never have, and they didn't, and they shouldn't be.
The history exists together in deed records as well. Like if you look at the Chiltons or Johnstons or the Fords, then this information, those are white families, and you'll find the Cases or the Kretz or the black families within deed records. So it's really about building community and finding out who these families are and where we can get more information about them in order to find out more and in order to be able to deliver more. Because I think that's our biggest thing right now, is to find, we would love to be able to connect other families to this area.
I mean, this is another thing we're working on, is like, what is a home place? I mean, is the home place only belong to homeowners? No, I think a home place belongs to the people who lived here, whose families lived here, who had entire lives, schools, communities, churches, friendships. And so that's kind of a new direction we're going to take this project, is to explore what is a home place. and kind of redefine that. And this area along the creek is significant to the farm. And the farm that I bought, we bought from the descendants who had purchased the farm in 1783 from Patrick Henry. So we bought from that family. We're the second family to own this place since white settlement. And so that feels very special to us. This whole place is just as historic in all kinds of ways. And I have learned so much. Like, for example, you look at these trees around here. Well, you can see, it's hard to see, but there's a pasture fence right here. This was all pasture until maybe 60 years ago. So this was open. And so when Kayla, I met her first, she said that her ancestress was buried in my pasture. And I thought, well, how could that be along the creek? But then when you discover that, oh yeah, here's the fence back down here, and these trees aren't that old finally, except for a few, that starts to make sense. And you start looking at the landscape. And so I've looked at aerial photographs, which is fascinating to see how the land has changed. And we've located houses that are no longer here. And we also know that it's hard to see from here, but there was a road that came across and crossed the creek right at this point, and then went on up and on over to where you would have gotten to the Elm Bend school and the Elm Bend church. And so we believe that there were other houses along here, and that this was a thriving community. And very often in accounts you hear the story of the Johnston Bridge, which is up here. You'll pass it, and that's sort of a landmark that still exists, one of the few, but it's referenced a lot by both black and white families in their stories. There were picnics at the Johnston Bridge for a long time. So
The road that you speak of that was on the backside over here that leads through the pasture actually was a road that my uncle Herbert told us that, this isn't a new discovery to my family. We actually visited these places for years. My aunts, my cousins, there were many family members before me that know about this, but they did not have the accessibility to do what they needed to do in order to maintain it or to make sure that it stayed within the family. So, I really am thankful to Lynn because she has worked with me in such a way that, I've never really noticed or seen it anywhere else when it comes to allowing me to just come in her home and almost be like I'm hers and really work with her to uncover this history and to preserve it. This has been probably one of the most emotional projects I've ever had to be a part of, just based on the fact that these are my ancestors. This is family for
it's
me.
your home place, girl.
Yeah, this is my home place, right?
Well, as usual, I'm walking through the woods and just looking at everything. And I happened to see a piece of blue pottery, and I've found pottery around. So I went and looked at it, and it turned out that there was broken pottery, blue, brown, even glassware in there. And so I felt like it had probably, belonged to a household. I mean, it was definitely domestic and old. So I just kept it there because I was hoping that historians or geologists or someone would come along and tell me if this was significant, why it might be here, because I didn't know. Recently, though, I was on a vintage aerial and I saw that it looked like there had been a house down at that point. So it makes sense that this was one of the houses that belonged to one of the families of Elm Bend, and that this is the pottery from one of those houses.
And from that point, we just kept talking, and we didn't even realize that might be the property of Ben and Ann. We thought it was down some actually, but the more that we talked, the more that we compare records and things like that, we've noticed that pottery in that certain location, even with the archaeologist Brittany Thompson, she was an BK archaeologist student, helped us to confirm that would have been something that someone used possibly for a memorial site. So it further confirmed Ben and Ann's burial site, and something that Lynn had found out before I'd even stepped foot on the property.
And she said there was a foundation, or there was the remains of a house in this area as Herbert did. So we had two independent confirmations that were historic, and since they lined up, we feel pretty confident that they are true. this farm, before we came here and raised sheep on it, used to be a big tobacco farm. You can tell by the barn back there that there's tobacco, and then the one on the hill is a lot bigger, and actually the one across the creek used to be, and it's huge. So this was an enormous tobacco farm. At other times they grew a lot of corn and wheat and apples, which we believe went to the bourbon industry. But then we came here with our sheep, which we'd been in business, I don't know, about 20 years with our sheep. And it's a great farm. We had to renovate it because it had been in actually cattle. And so we have made it more regenerative by our practices of rotational grazing. We sell lamb to a national grocery chain. We are the only American lamb supplier in the Midwest region. And so we also have other farmers that raise lamb for us, and they arrive at this barn, and then we sort them, and then we take them on to their next experience. It's just been a great farm for sheep. And sheep, there used to be, back in 150, 60 years ago, almost every farm in Woodford County had some sheep, and so that was the case. So there actually had been sheep here before, but in small numbers, like 10. A family might have 10 for the wool, and then maybe would sell some for the lamb or eat it. So when we came to this farm, the farm actually there was maybe 240 acres for sale, and we were downsizing. So we said we want 90 acres, and we looked at the soil map, right? And so we came and got the best 90 acres in terms of soil, because we knew it would be productive for the sheep and for the forages that they need. Some of the other parts of the farm don't have as good a soil as the section we have. Fortunately for us, it also had these two big barns that we use. One is our lambing barns, and like I said, they used to be tobacco barns. And the nice thing about tobacco barns and sheep is that tobacco barns have the flaps that open up so that you can air cure, and that makes the airflow very good for livestock inside. So there's a lot of good stuff, a lot of good combinations, and why this was an excellent place, and an excellent place for sheep. They do well. They're really healthy here, and the soil really contributes to the good soil, which people don't think South Woodford has, but we do. So behind me is the Johnston farmhouse. It was built around 1795 or so, 1792, by Thomas and Elizabeth Johnston, who moved here with 6 children. They did not own slaves. Thomas died at, 1792. He died, and he left Elizabeth, a widow, with these 6 kids, and said, sell the livestock and build a house. So there's one part of the house that's fairly small. It's the kitchen now, and that was what we think is the first house. It's stone. They were Scottish people, and so they were in that Scotch Presbyterian group that came here and built all these stone houses around here. So then the next part, which it's kind of hard to see now, but it is a rectangle that goes that way, which is the next stone house, and this was owned by Silas and Anne, who were the second generation. Anne brought slaves with her. And you can see the house is big. It has big old windows, it was definitely, they grew wealthier at that point. And so they had this big addition built, which is also stone. The second addition is also made out of stone, and the walls are about 18 inches thick. It has plaster, a lot of it is still original inside. And then the third addition is what we call the nose, which is this sort of Victorian looking part that sticks off, and it has a parlor in it and a nice bedroom, big rooms, and a really great staircase. So they were, as their fortunes grew and as time went on, they expanded the house from a fairly smallish stone house that looks a lot like, if you go to the Jack Jewett house, it looks just like that pretty much. And so they added quite a bit to this place. When we came, there were a couple of falling down outbuildings, like there was a smokehouse, but it was just in disrepair. And the farm actually was after 1935, when Mr. Wallace Johnston died upstairs in the sunroom, it his wife finally got her wish to move to town, and then it became tenant farmers and renters. And so when we bought it 70 or 80 years later, it had been in renting for a long time, which meant that they didn't upgrade. So that therefore a lot of the historic parts of it are intact. And so that makes it a pretty amazing house. And what made Jim and I like walk in, and we saw the staircase, and the realtor said, "Oh, you can just knock this house down." And we didn't even look at each other. We're like, we're not gonna say anything. We're gonna take it on, no heat, need a new roof, whatever, we're gonna get it. So we did. It's been a lot of work, but we love it. This is the Johnston Hiffner Cemetery. The first person buried in it was a little girl named Sarah who died in 1830. It also has a couple Revolutionary War soldiers in it, not Johnstons, but neighbors. And then the founders of the people who probably built the second part of the house here, Silas and Ann Johnston, are buried in there. Silas was born in 1787. So they were pretty old cemetery. And then their families as they go through different generations, all the way up to 1926, the last one in 1926. At some point, some of them decided they'd rather be buried in Versailles, but a lot of the family is here. And then there are also 3 stones on the back side of the cemetery that we were told by an earlier resident were markers for formerly enslaved people. We have not done the research to see who they might be. I do know that in 1837, when Silas Johnston is buried here, he had his will. We have a list of 13 slaves' first names, but none of them, so far that we know, line up with Kayla's family that I know of yet. And you can tell it's a pretty magnificent stone structure. I'm curious about why somebody in 1830 would build such a big thing. So I'm not sure that the wall actually dates back that far, but that's another thing to find out. We're also standing on what was the original driveway, and this is how you would have come in here to come to the house when the house is actually faced that way, when its orientation was that way before the nose was put on it.
We are currently about half a mile from Lynn's farm, Lynn's land over at Wayne Boyd's house. This is the property where William Case and America Case lived. America was born and raised in Elm Bend, same as William. America is actually buried on this property. That is her tombstone behind us towards the left, and then right behind us is the Tyler family. The Cases actually bought this property from the Tyler family around 1932, 33. And America lived here until she died in 1940, and William lived here until he died as well. This family lot is very sincere to our family, as my aunt and my uncle have been, my great aunt Kat and my uncle Herbert. They both come out here every year to visit this gravesite. Not only is America buried out here, but so is Katie Kreth, which is Anna Case's mother and Uncle Herbert's grandmother. And so she comes out here to place flowers and just to take a moment of silence for her mother and her grandmother. Wayne Boyd, the property owner here, has been a crucial part of helping to preserve the burial sites. And we've been working with him to kind of figure out, whether or not their bodies were actually even buried back here, or were they buried towards the front of the yard. It's another question to ask and to answer. There are a lot of questions that come up, and being able to be out here and to be in the field and working with other people to kind of figure out, how can we take this and turn this into a site for others to be able to access and to memorialize their family members as well. Another pretty interesting fact about some of these burial sites and these tombstones and things are the fact that, because descendants aren't the ones that are taking care of them or maintaining them, some of the names are misspelled. Currently, America Case's name is spelled C-A-S-E on her tombstone, which the family doesn't really align with that spelling because it was the spelling that was given to us from a former enslaver. So nowadays we spell it C-A-I-S-E, and the hope is to eventually get a new tombstone with the correct spelling on there, just to kind of keep that difference. Back in I believe it was the early 1990s, John Elmer Case received a letter from the White Case family inviting our family to a family reunion, which he totally ignored the letter, but they spelled their last name C-A-S-E as well. So that was the difference that we made with the I in order to put a distance between us and enslavement.
Hi, my name is Rachel Noble Varney. I'm the program manager at the Monuments Workshop, and I was one of the first staff to start here with the project, so I have had the pleasure of talking to a lot of people across Kentucky who are working on sites that are important to them, monuments, memorials. And when we first heard from Bluegrass Trust about doing the deTour, Kayla and Lynn sprung to mind. One of the things that really struck me about Elm Bend is the level of trust and cooperation between Kayla and Lynn. You can see what a site looks like before some of the really extensive preservation and memorialization work has been done, but they have the stories and they've worked together to collect all of the stories. So it's a really rich project, but it reflects something that's more realistic, what most people will see if you're walking around your land, if you're going to look at a family cemetery that hasn't gotten care over time. That's what you see at Elm Bend is more like what everyday Kentuckians will see when they're walking around thinking about that. I'm very impressed with their research because it's thorough, but it's also really personal, and they've managed to weave those two pieces together. There's a real richness and actually like a rigor and a quality to the kind of history that is produced when you're telling stories from a lot of people's perspectives, when you're getting everyone that you can's take on what happened. So you've got a combination of documents, you're walking the land, you're talking to the neighbors, you're talking to descendants, you're talking to different generations. It's telling more than the story of a family, it's telling the story of a community. And so I think projects like this bring the memory and the place together and remind us all why it's important to have connections to the land that we come from, the land that we live on now, and to kind of honor that memory.
My name is Emma Collins, and I am a third-year law student at the University of Kentucky. Doing the research on cemetery laws, I've discovered how vast Kentucky's cemetery laws are, but also how incredibly narrow they are, and how situations that I couldn't even begin to ponder are the ones that these laws are created to protect, and situations where I can see my family being in, and situations I can see family members that have been buried in specific burial plots being in are things that aren't addressed. So the thing that I am working on right now is essentially compiling every single statute, every single law in the state of Kentucky that has to do with cemeteries and that has to do with burials. Kentucky doesn't have this comprehensive description of every single law that relates to how you can interact with a cemetery. What we're doing right now is taking every single law, looking at any regulations that have been created by any other government group in order to see how those all interact with each other. There are hundreds, and there are hundreds of cases that have interpreted those laws. So what we're working on doing is making those laws make sense to a person that has never read a law in their life. And the way that we're doing that is taking it step by step, law by law, and explaining it, and taking that out a little bit into the macrocosm and saying, if I was a person that was just approaching a cemetery and had a very casual relationship with the local cemetery, what would I need to know that's in these laws? The result of that is going to be really short, really simple to understand sentences that someone who wants to engage with their local cemetery, a guide for them to be able to do that without having to know the intricacies of the law. As a law student, I think that we're particularly primed to be able to do that because we're taught how to read statutes, how to interpret statutes, how to make sense of the court cases that exist that are describing the statutes. And I think that makes it a lot easier to bridge the gap between what the law says versus what it actually means. One of the things that I can do is understand the law and is describe the law to another person. It's to tell the stories of far different people with far different experiences, and more importantly, people whose experiences haven't been told.
Hi, my name's Zach Bray. I'm a law professor at the University of Kentucky, J. David Rosenberg College of Law. And with my friend and my former colleague here at UK, Melinda Price, who's now at the University of Michigan, I'm the co-director of the Monuments Workshop. We started talking in the hallways about our shared interests in monuments and memorial spaces, the laws that protect monuments and memorial spaces, how we thought a lot of America's laws about monuments and memorial spaces could be improved or reformed. One of the things that Melinda and I say when we're together at conferences talking about our work and the importance of preserving monuments and memorial spaces in this country and the challenges that people face is that you shouldn't have to be a superhero to protect a monumental or memorial place that you care about. And what Kayla and Lynn have been doing is heroic. And when we think about historically black cemeteries like the cemetery at Elm Bend, we're looking at a particularly important part of that story about promises and representations about the Constitution, the rights that we all share, that have not always been fully, accurately, and completely told, and that need to be told. One of the things that we've often found with our partners that we're working with on different projects is that they will come to us with problems that they think are primarily legal. And when we talk to them, we realize that their main problems are not really legal. The opposite problem happens too. We have folks who come to us with problems that they think are primarily non-legal. And really what we find is some of the most significant challenges are legal. People tell stories about place, but they often don't know the stories about the law that may be relevant to that place. I certainly think that lawyers have to be prepared to think about litigation. You're really looking for solutions, pragmatic solutions that don't depend on litigation, but depend on looking for a way to honor places and stories, especially those that haven't been told. And I ask people, give me examples of what you think about as a monument. Most people associate the term with a statue of a guy, and usually a guy, on a pedestal. But at the heart of any monumental space is really going to be change over time. A place like Elm Bend, which has been a place for people to gather, reflect, define who they are, who their families are, who their community is a monument as much or maybe more so as any statue of somebody on a pedestal. When we heard from the Bluegrass Trust about their interest in a virtual detour, we thought that what's happening at Elm Bend was a great opportunity for us to showcase work that's being done by people that we think are heroes.
My name's EJ Radermacher. I'm a 3L at the University of Kentucky College of Law, and I'm a student associate for the Monuments Workshop. What I've done so far at the workshop is mostly look into cemeteries, protecting cemeteries, and doing so through title research, starting with names that we get from interested parties in certain cemeteries in different areas throughout the country, and using those names to trace the ownership, and then that can help us determine the line of ownership through title, and then use that to determine what rights or needs the communities have that come to us requesting these type of services. So title comes into play both in terms of ownership as well as rights of access. When our clients come to us with questions about their rights and ownership as well as access regarding these specific cemeteries. That's where the Monuments Workshop comes in, and specifically title research. I can determine whether certain people or groups of people or otherwise can legally make legal claims, or we can have settlement discussions about getting these people access to visit loved ones who've passed. Cemeteries, more than just honoring those who've passed, sometimes have other religious significances as well. So there's a multifaceted desire, like clients who come to us requesting access or questioning their right to go to a cemetery. They have all sorts of reasons to do so. To address any questions that descendants might have regarding a cemetery that they have either descendants buried in or a religious connection to, or even a historic and preservation-minded connection to, I would say that it is important to reach out to groups like the Monuments Workshop and Professor Bray and the team here to ask questions and clarify what type of rights you have, what type of access you might be able to get. People like us at the Monuments Workshop can make connections between you, the descendants, and landowners. We can make those type of connections that can establish and protect your rights as descendants, as well as open the door for access to the cemetery that's not yours, but definitely feels like yours if someone that you love is buried there.
Thank you for joining us on this virtual detour of Elm Bend with Bluegrass Trust. We appreciate you for coming out and learning more about the land and my ancestors.
We hope that you will continue to look into this project by looking at our website called elmbendky.com, where we have put all our historic research together into some really interesting stories, and we have videos and things like that. We also have a Facebook page. Thank you so much.
And to learn more about Bluegrass Trust detours, head over to bluegrasstrust.org.